This is Cybersound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity, with your hosts, Jason Pufall and Stephen Maresca.
Welcome to Cybersound. I'm your host, Jason Pufall, joined, as always, by Steve Maresca. I try to give inflection every time to see if I can make you smile or do something. And we've also got Krystal Racine today, account executive with Vancord. We're here to talk, I guess, what are we calling it? The NERCOMP 2023 debrief. So our experiences,
if you will,
all things experiences NERCOMP. For me, it's always a good event for me. I had the chance of sitting on the NERCOMP board for a while I was at UConn. I know a lot of people there. It's always really, for me personally, enjoyable just to catch up with everybody.
So, Jason, what is NERCOMP?
NERCOMP's the Northeast Regional Computing Program. I'll call it a smaller version of EDUCAUSE, right? It's more localized, Pennsylvania up through Maine, kind of collaboration of higher education, really for learning and probably support within the IT environment. Those kind of the two big missions, training and learning. So, I'm curious. I always have to separate myself a bit because really there is that big personal aspect for me. It is so much fun to catch up with everybody. Curious what your perspectives, just to the conference in general, were. It's pretty quick. You're in and out.
I struggle the same way. I did a lot of former colleagues there. It was nice to see people, talk to them, just catch up. I think it's been multiple years of not very active engagement with peers in the public sphere. So everyone was really quite cordial and happy to be together in the same place.
Absolutely. And with no masks. So that's
and with
a
no
big
masks.
change.
Yeah, the previous ones had masks. Yeah. And I think I don't know if they quite hit their pre-pandemic number, but I know they were really close to it, which was nice. So I think they're starting to see a return to normal attendance numbers. I felt like the vendor, which is where we spent a lot of our time, right? The vendor area, really well attended. I think it's nice that we've been able to go for multiple years now because I think the reception to us was pretty warm. I think there's a lot of familiarity. We're working with a lot of those schools now, which is really nice. I think the conversations were pretty authentic. I didn't feel like sitting on that side of the booth that that we had to be the salespeople as much as we just had were sort of security ambassadors.
I agree. Yeah, big difference from my second year where people were going Vancord to it's Vancord. So that nice recognition changes.
Well, we were lime green then too. So we stood out. Maybe we were more bold, but I'm not sure as refined perhaps. So, I know we had grand plans of trying to really do a large podcast recording session while we were there. And I think we scaled back and got a little bit more modest. And Krystal, you took the reins, grabbed the mics and walked around and interviewed a few people.
Yeah, that was really cool because I got to meet with people firsthand, just kind of walking up and asking them, what did they think as far as cybersecurity trends and getting insight, and the honesty that we got was really cool versus it kind of being like a sit down and scripted session.
Yeah. And the little mics, they probably didn't quite feel as formidable as standing behind these maybe. So I think people were at ease.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we kind of pulled out 3 clips that we felt. I think that thematically we probably heard a couple people speak to as we were talking with folks. So we wanted to play those.
What would you say the biggest focus should be when it comes to cybersecurity for higher education institutes?
I think that it would be talking to the end users and getting them more aware of the issues that we have and we're trying to keep them and protect them from.
Outstanding. And the $1 million question of the day, what keeps you up at night when it comes to cybersecurity?
It would also be the same thing with keeping the training and what they're doing and getting them the information that they need and making sure that they're as secure as possible.
Fantastic. Thank you. What would you say keeps you up at night when it comes to cybersecurity?
Ransomware and threat networks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Where should higher education focus when it comes to cybersecurity?
We really need someone to contact when things start to go wrong. So if there's a cybersecurity incident and we need to know who to call, right? We need a big red button to push. When everything's going wrong, we need to pick up the red phone and call someone. And that should be a partner that really knows our environment and that we can trust on our network.
Fantastic. Thank you so much and have a great show.
Thank you.
So I think we ordered those the way we did on purpose because I think, everybody should start with security awareness. Maybe that helps reduce the risk of, some of the ransomware and other pieces. But, I would say security awareness seemed to be a big topic in general. Everybody was concerned about that.
Yeah, for sure. It was the $1 million question. I'm grateful we didn't actually have to hand out $1 million answer checks because it was a repeat offender for sure.
And we do a bunch of it, and I think honestly, coming from higher ed, we probably have more respect for how important an educated workforce or educated community, is.
I mean, ultimately in higher ed, trust is the currency, whether it's for academic purposes or, security alike. So having everyone be operating at the same level of awareness is kind of integral to any sort of security program.
And I think there's a recognition now that it has to be a core part of whatever training occurs institutionally.
Right. And, mandated training is a big deal in higher ed. So anything that really makes it part of that fabric is important.
Right.
Absolutely.
So if your training fails and then people, click on those phishing emails, there's obviously the concern around ransomware and threat networks, right?
Threat networks. Yeah.
There's no doubt everybody's worried about ransomware still. Maybe we've seen a slight downturn in it over the last roughly 12 months, right? We've spoken about that on previous podcasts. But it's still a huge concern for everybody. It looms larger than the regulatory compliance requirements that they've got. I think that's the thing that keeps everybody up.
Yeah, and it's the lens through which lots of risk and compliance is interpreted. Certainly, insurance premiums have gone way up because of ransomware. Tabletops are focused on ransomware. It's the main specter and fear, without any question. And in the education side of things, in the actual awareness side, it doesn't matter if someone clicks. I mean, we don't want them to, but we want them to know that when they click, that they're equipped to actually back away and report it or, give early warning. And that's the linkage between the two. Perfection is not attainable in that sort of thing, but as long as everyone's vigilant, you have a better chance of a positive outcome.
I like that you brought up tabletops because I think it's the tool that a lot of security professionals are using now to bring the community together and talk about these things. I don't think it was as commonplace. Really, even 3 years ago, for non-IT people to sit down and talk about the risks of some of the the potential incidents, ransomware obviously being one. So we've seen now a lot more. We've gotten a lot more requests to do tabletops. I think there's generally a lot of interest, and I think people are now approaching it from convening the right community. Right, their discussions are, I'll make sure I have HR, I'll make sure I have legal, I'll make sure I have communications. Like they know the people that they need to bring into a room, which I think is really positive.
Yeah, and some of that requires conversation before an actual crisis hits. So, it helps that everyone's at least aware of their role and the sequence of operations, what things to say, what things not to say. Pretty essential, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I like to say it's the adult fire drill.
It is the
we all
adult.
had to go out to the recess
Out the back
yard
of the
for
bus.
kindergarten when we knew where to go. A tabletop is just like that. It really helps you to understand where you're going to break down. And I think that's really, really important to companies.
You might as well find the flaws in your plan before it's an actual necessity.
A simulation prior to the tragedy.
So, a couple of the things maybe that just jumped out to me from a vendor standpoint. There weren't tons of security vendors there, which frankly, the last few conferences I feel like I've been at has been predominantly, or maybe security vendor heavy. There's definitely a handful of online curriculum, your Canvases and et cetera. That's obviously, there's a huge move there, obviously. A lot of, I'll call them high-tech classroom stuff, which I think we probably would have expected.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just had an opportunity to talk with Maurice Simpkins from the application fraud detection company. So some interesting, I'll call them slightly tangentially related, security practices. So, that was really enjoyable. But I was kind of gratified to see that it wasn't just, 25, firewall and identity management and security consulting, because not that their conferences have been so heavily that way, but I've seen a trend in conferences in generally be very security specific.
I mean, it's heavy emphasis on learning management systems and other educational technology, without a doubt. It's a continuum, ultimately. I mean, kind of echoing the awareness aspect, you can't really deliver that stuff without those capabilities in place to begin with. So might as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think if, for people who are listening who don't attend, I mean, I think it's a good conference. It's not so big that you get lost. It's localized. That New England area is reasonably small, so you have a really high likelihood of running into peers. There's good opportunities to collaborate in small groups, which I think is great. So that networking piece is really solid, and they always have good food. I mean, honestly, they always have good food and drink during the vendor sessions.
And actually, on the vendor session aspect, this may sound strange coming out of our mouths, but the vendors at NERCOMP are, somewhat off to the side. They're not front and center like they might be in some conferences. I think it's a nice balance that they achieve there, and I know that other attendees certainly appreciate that.
Yeah.
I agree. It's nice and easy for people just to kind of walk up and down the aisles without people jumping out or, just trying to shove a product or a solution in front of your face. It's a very calm, welcoming conference where everybody is just really sharing information and kind of chit-chatting. It doesn't make a difference, what school you're from, what vendor you're with. It's just a really nice way to kind of understand what your peers are doing and understand what's going on in the industry as far as trends.
I think that's the beauty of higher ed.
Yeah.
I mean, that's one great thing about higher ed is they are collaborative. For sure. So, I don't know if there's any other major points. I think, our reception was good. The conference lived up to its expectations. Providence is always fun to go to. I mean, it's got good restaurants.
It's a great city.
So, if people haven't gone, there's a number of good reasons to attend NERCOMP.
I mean, I think there are some other common threads worth mentioning. Everybody's interested and worried about Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act concerns, some other compliance aspects. People are definitely talking regularly about staffing issues and difficulties in filling positions. It's become more problematic for a lot of institutions of higher ed. And I mean, I think we had some productive conversations with other schools and some of our former colleagues on those topics beyond what we shared a moment ago. We're in an interesting time where everyone needs to be creative in addressing problems of this nature. And, NERCOMP is a good venue for people to brainstorm together and share what works and share what doesn't.
So we're intentionally putting together a kind of organic podcast for this one in particular. I know we did a podcast on GLBA. It's possible somebody didn't hear that. It's, I think it's important enough for maybe you to spend, half a minute on, why are people talking about it?
Sure. So GLBA in particular, it's a regulation that governs financial institutions. And the Department of Education considers institutions of higher education to be financial institutions as it pertains to financial aid. It's part of their Title IV accreditation, Title IV funding. Basically, if you're a parent or a student applying your FAFSA form, that makes a school or university a financial institution. Therefore, from the perspective of the Federal Trade Commission, schools are absolutely required to protect financial data of consumers and customers. That means that schools need to put in proper safeguards, self-assess, make sure they're doing risk assessments, coming up with incident response plans, doing cybersecurity awareness training, reporting on an annual basis, and a variety of other things that basically help to safeguard data. The rules are changing. There are some deadlines upcoming, June 9th for making improvements with respect to data safeguards. And it's a landscape that's shifting. It's been something that's been forecast for the better part of 5 or 6 years, but the Federal Student Aid Office is changing the way that they evaluate and enforce. So that's the main message ultimately. For anyone in a school or university, you're obligated, even if you're not quite aware of that fact. And it's worth asking your peers in other departments whether they're aware of that so that you can work together to make improvements.
Right. Right. But I mean, I absolutely saw you having sort of conversation after conversation about this. It's top of mind for a lot of schools.
Absolutely. And it's tough because there's a lot of uncertainty about how to go about making improvements and what expectations there are.
Yeah. And that's the challenge with not having a sort of a ratified, due date and, explicit security standard. I mean, I know they're talking 800-171, but, there's obviously been pushback on that. So I don't think schools are, burying their heads in the sand necessarily, but I think, some of them are definitely waiting for the dust to settle before they make any substantive changes. I feel like that's a decent overview of the conference as a whole. I don't know. I don't have any parting thoughts. I don't know if either of you do.
No, it was an all-around great time, and already looking forward to next year.
I think that's a fair way to end. If anybody has any questions, maybe not questions about NERCOMP per se, but tabletops, incident response, GLBA, feel free to reach out. We're happy to do another podcast on a topic that's specific, or just answer individual questions if anybody has them. So, as always, we appreciate everybody listening and hope you got value out of today.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn or on Twitter at Vancord Security. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.